Incremental greetings. This is Glenn Palau, also known as William Palace. Welcome to this episode of N School Celebrity Podcast. Strictly speaking, I don't know what number of episode will be this one, and the reason for that is because we will record this episode incrementally. That is asynchronously. So I will record a chunk, send it over to our guest, Axel. He will process that and record his reply and send it back to me. So more or less what we could do with incremental writing and incremental reading, but on spoken form. We're just experimenting on that. So, without further ado, let's introduce Axel about one topic we want to cover, that is, what is intrinsically valuable state, also known as self-valuable state. You could argue that that's the goal of the goals. Let's say that now I am one of my goals is sharing my experiences, and a subset of those goals are increasing my English proficiency, my writing skills, my programming skills, because I want to manage my own website, which I'm learning currently, and more goals, but all of these goals are serving to one main goal, one purpose that are above all those, that makes like an umbrella goal, and that is sharing the experience of the sake of ending this end school's library, putting the coercion to an end. But is that an intrinsically valuable state? Is there such a thing that we are now defining theoretically what's something like an atheist substitute for God? So without further ado, let me ask you, because you have to imagine, if you are listening to me now, that I'm speaking alone, recording that. So, Axel, if you can present yourself once again for the people who don't seen the last episodes of you, and what is your definition of intrinsically valuable state? Why you think it's important for us, for human beings? And yeah, more or less an outline.
Hey William, thank you for having me on again. I'm really very curious to see how this incremental podcast would work out. So, I think that there are two things that we need to define here. One being intrinsic value, and the other being the more specific concept of intrinsically valuable state. So, we say that something has intrinsic value when it is valuable for its own sake, and not because it helps you get something else of value. In this sense, intrinsic value can be contrasted with instrumental value, or otherwise called the derivative value. So, for example, I may say that I value happiness intrinsically, and I just want to be happy by itself. I don't care if being happy doesn't give me anything else. An example of instrumental value may be money. Now, I don't value money for its own sake. I only value it because it helps me attain things which have actual value. Also, obviously, some things can have both intrinsic and instrumental value, like learning or health. So, learning can be both instrumental and intrinsic because sometimes we learn things only insofar as they help us achieve certain goals, but other times we just want to know for its own sake. And even if there is no subsequent applicability of the knowledge, we can still say that it was worth learning that thing. So, enough about intrinsic value, let's move on to intrinsically valuable state, which you mentioned at the beginning. Now, I learned about this concept from Piotr Wozniak, although I'm not sure if he was the first one to think of it, even if I do believe that he came up with it independently. And I admit that I don't perfectly understand this concept, but a brief summary, as I understand it, is this. So, currently, science can say if there are things which have intrinsic value, so basically, no matter what goals you have, you wouldn't be able to claim that they were in any way scientifically valid. And therefore, until we actually know whether something has intrinsic value separate from human existence, the only sensible thing we can do is to strive to understand reality so that we can either find this intrinsic value or just disprove its existence. and it doesn't matter how improbable the existence of something of such value actually is. No matter how low the probability is, it may still make sense to pursue it. So, intrinsically valuable state as a concept may be interesting for people who are seeking a scientifically valid purpose to their life. Okay, so a misunderstanding which I initially had about intrinsically valuable state was, don't we already know of things which have intrinsic value? So, like for example, many people would say that for them love or friendship or let's say competence are of intrinsic value. What about those people? But then I thought that maybe those are subjective intrinsic values. They just sit at the roots of the value hierarchies of particular people, whereas intrinsically valuable state, as I understand it, maybe strives to find something that has, so to speak, objective intrinsic value. Now, you asked the question if helping end forced schooling is an example of intrinsically valuable state. And in light of Wozniak's definition of the concept, I would say that maybe no, because that goal is not scientifically valid, at least as I understand it. However, I still think that helping people may very well be of intrinsic value to many of us, in the sense that subjectively it sits as one of the roots in our value hierarchies. So, some people may find it very fulfilling to help others for its own sake, not for any other benefit, and in that sense it is intrinsic, but I'm just not sure that it fits the criteria of intrinsically valuable state. One thing that I'm very interested to learn is whether the set of intrinsic values is fixed, like hard-coded at birth, maybe, or whether it is possible to remove and add intrinsic values into our value systems. Whether it's possible for any arbitrary thing to assume the role of an intrinsic value if certain steps are taken. And maybe an example of this would be in learning, where some people say that they just want to learn certain things for their own sake, like mathematics. It doesn't matter to those people if the knowledge will have any subsequent applicability, and just knowing is enough. So one may say that the intrinsic values of the person now include learning mathematics. But another possibility is that we all have an intrinsic value to learn about certain interesting things. And it is just that the brain is flexible with respect to what things fit that slot of being valuable to learn about for their own sake. So, what do you think? Is it possible for us to change the set of intrinsic values we have, or is it fixed at birth?
Okay. So the point is that for some people, something may be an intrinsic value, but the exact same thing for another person maybe not, or even the opposite, may be perceived as something very negative. Okay, moving on. Now you said that there's a misunderstanding. For instance, you could say that love, friendship, competence are intrinsic value, but yet still they are not universal. There's people who really wants to self-isolate. They don't seek friendships. They want to be alone for long life. That's their way to understand life. That's their way to be happy on the perspective. Even though we could argue it's more common, it's more mainstream, it's not absolute. That's why, once again, cannot be. It's not a universal law, for instance, and therefore it cannot be scientifically valid. That's still subjectively. Now, you said that my example, that doing this very same podcast is not an intrinsic value state. Because the goal may be not scientifically valid. So, the point is that what I'm doing is subjective. For me, it is rewarding. It is, I feel that because I need to do it. This feeling, right? But some people don't and won't do the same thing with me, as me. That's why, once again, I can reformulate that as a subjective drive, as a subjective intrinsic value. Okay. Then you said about the mathematics and learning. So, and I have one other example with ninjas. So, if you're losing in this, you most likely you will have the concept of ninja because it's very mainstream. But I would like to specify the original meaning in Japanese. Ja, the ja portion of ninja, it's a counter for tools. So, in the most literal sense, ninja means the nin tool, the tool called nin. Yeah, the tool called nin. So we could phrase it as a human tool. That's what it is. A ninja is a human tool. So, since they are born or very young, they are trained to become very skillful on their job, on their mission, which will be murder, assassination, and this kind of thing, right? They are stealthy. They will try to assassinate without being noticed, and so on. But what happens is that once they achieve their mission, what they do, or in our case, their master or the clan or family is assassinated, it's murdered, then they no longer have a plan for life because they don't have an intrinsic value. It's always extrinsic. They are being told what to do. You have been living, training for one purpose, and that was the mission. And that mission cannot be accomplished because there's no one to tell you what to do, or the victim, the target, is already dead. Then what do? Your life becomes worthless. Your only reason for life is no longer existing. Therefore, your life is also not worth living any further, right? That's why, at least in that culture, I'm also generalizing. They usually commit suicide, but in a religious, not religious, but in a certain manner. It's not just drop as simple as that. And I'm now recalling seppuku for summarize the thing, but well, the main point is that. So now my question is, that will be the counter example. That's not innate. That person has been instructed, trained, had to learn to understand life like that as a tool. If one of a person is not trained, educated to be a tool, perhaps he will keep desiring to live because he will perceive life as another a very different thing, not just achieving one goal and that's it, right? And going back with Kilian Jornet, the alpinist and runner, the endurance runner, is when he coped with the fame, he kept going, but with his early 20s, he achieved everything he could. He smashed all the records on all the endurance runs across the globe, around the world. Is what's left to do. Now you're number one. You even repeated some number ones, even without resting what you need to rest. And even though you are still number one, not only today on that year, but on history, you smashed the record, right? Is now you're in your 20s, and he said that he planned to achieve that on his 40s or even 50s, because it's endurance. You can retire kind of old. Is now what do? You have all life on your hands still. You're very young. What do? So he said, oh, screw that. He no longer runs. He no longer competes because it's pointless now. And he is making his own challenges. For instance, some years ago, he went to the Everest. He's making his own challenges. So, instead of, oh, screw that, I will stop living because now it's pointless. I achieved my goal. I'm number one of the world. Is okay. I will do something very crazy that no one could even try to do. So I'm competing only. I'm speaking with first person as if I was him. It's okay. I will do something crazy that I do like, and not only that, that it's defining my lifestyle. Now I think he lives on or has lived on Norway and so on, with in very remote areas, so he can go to the mountains quickly. And here's all he cares about. Is now the question is why he's doing that. It's because it's an intrinsic value. No one told him to do that. It's himself. The main difference with a ninja is that it's been done by himself. No one is forcing him directly or indirectly as motivation of money. That maybe I wouldn't do that, but since I need money to live on, I will do it just for the sake of sponsorships, prize money, and so on. No, he doesn't. He reached a point that he no longer needs that. They don't. He doesn't do that for the money, right? So now the question is he doing that for an intrinsic value? Just going with the mountains, breathing the air, walking, let's say metaphorically dancing with the mountain. This is an intrinsic value for him. It's hard coded. I will phrase it as hard coded to death. He's willing to put his life on the line, which doing some things that like going to the Everest with no oxygen and so on. He really does. He really did several times put the life on the line. So that's really what I think an intrinsic value. But yet again, it's subjective. So the end point is there's something that it's innate in all humans and all human beings that we could call it objectively. Is everyone seeks happiness? I'm not sure about that. It's the same as being what you said before, but it's not the instrumental value of okay, I'll do this or that to become happy. Is no, the goal is being happy. And being happy, maybe climbing mountains, maybe staying at home alone with the computer, or maybe I don't know, anything that intrinsically, instrumentally, reaches to happiness. But being happiness is universal. How can you prove that? And I have one silly example just to end my reply here. Is look at the dogs. Now I'm having my first dog ever in my life on my 30s. So you have a dog that only had with her mother like some weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I don't know how much, how long. It's okay. How can he know why he knows what to do for peeing? Why he's raising his rear leg to do that? Is it innate? He hasn't been taught that. Or is he self-learning, self-taught, just by trial and error, all these things? Why is he barking when he notices noise at the door? He never experienced that of another dog. Never. He's not copying that behavior. He hasn't experienced that. Why is he doing this? Is it innate? Since this, you could argue, I think I was told that at the school, that animals have some innate knowledge. It's hard-coded in their DNA. They don't need to learn it. It just comes with them. Now the question is, I also was told in the school that humans do not. So everything we do is learned. All the behavior is learned. All the personality traits are shaped with the experience. the environment, people around us. So now my final question is, if we were discussing that question in, let's say, Greece 2 millennia ago, will us be asking the same questions? There will be at least a root of, if that's true, that already indicates something. So I will send a word back to you, Axel.
Alright, so you brought up a lot of interesting ideas there, and I'll start with Clean Your Net. And by the way, thanks for introducing him to me. Seems like a very interesting guy, and a benefit of doing podcasts incrementally like this is that I have the time to read a bit on new ideas introduced. Anyway, so I got his book Run or Die, and in there he talks about how his main goal in racing is not actually winning in the sense of finishing in first place, but his goal is doing something that he didn't think was possible for him to achieve. And he talks about how many times he finishes first in the race but doesn't feel fulfilled because he didn't do something that he thought was impossible to do. In those races he was pretty confident beforehand that he would win, and in those same races he looked with envy at the people who didn't finish first but who had the satisfaction of achieving a goal they thought to be unachievable. So for example, for an amateur it may seem impossible to even finish the race, let alone win it. And so if there is a race in which the amateur manages to finish but Jornet wins and Jornet all along believed that he could win, then from Jornet's perspective the real winner is the amateur, because they're the ones who did what they believed to be impossible. They are the ones who overcame themselves. What's really interesting about this is that many of us only endeavor to achieve goals which we believe are actually possible, but Jornet seems to explicitly turn that on its head and sets out to achieve what he doesn't even believe is possible. And I wonder if there is some constant neural conflict in his head. On the one hand, his brain naturally being aversive towards trying to achieve what he believes to be unachievable, and on the other hand, his explicit goal of trying to achieve what he believes to be unachievable. I just wonder how healthy Jornet's way is, psychologically speaking. Or, of course, I may just be misunderstanding his philosophy. My current philosophy is that I should just strive towards achieving goals which I believe are achievable. And of course, I may be wrong in what I believe to be unachievable. It may be that I currently believe that many things to be impossible when they actually are possible. But the thing is that from any goal pursuit, you acquire new knowledge and you acquire confidence. And so by striving towards achieving goals which are currently achievable, you believe are currently achievable, I may gain knowledge which boosts my confidence that goals which I previously thought were unachievable are actually achievable. So I'm not that worried about having wrong estimations about what is possible, and I just strive towards what I believe currently to be possible. And in here I would just like to quickly mention Piotr Wozniak's article called Problem Valuation Network, which talks about a system in the brain that is capable of estimating the values, costs and likelihoods of successfully solving particular problems. And so when we are not confident that we can successfully solve some problem, then maybe this system is what produces that signal which we perceive as a lack of confidence, as an aversion to continuing to do work on the problem. So going back to Jornet, breaking records was just an instrumental goal to the possibly intrinsic one of overcoming himself. Breaking records was just one of those things that seemed impossible to him at the time, and for that reason he set the goal of breaking them. You also said something interesting, that for you exercise is only instrumental, not intrinsic, and then you said that you only value the outcome of the exercise, not the process of exercising. And I'm not sure that there is a direct correspondence between intrinsic and instrumental values on the one hand and enjoying the process versus only caring for the outcome on the other hand. I think that all four possible combinations are possible. So for example, you could value something intrinsically but hate the process of attaining it, and on the other hand you could also value something instrumentally only but still enjoy the process of attaining it, not only the outcome. And I'm not sure that Jornet actually enjoys the process of racing or the process of fulfilling his challenges. Recall that his goal, as he explained in his book, was to overcome himself. And if he enjoyed the process, there would be nothing to overcome. So for him, the pleasure comes at the end, but the path to the end is very painful, like not enjoyable at all, and that's the whole point for him. When it comes to me personally, though, I need the process itself to be fulfilling, not only the outcome. And in free learning, of course, the process itself is pleasurable, not only the end at which you actually apply the knowledge and achieve the goal which you had in mind while collecting the knowledge. In talking about ninjas, very nice analogy by the way, you bring up an interesting question of what happens when your current intrinsic goals become unachievable. And this is an opportunity for me to introduce an idea that I've been thinking about recently, that of having meta goals. I think that there is always an intrinsic meta goal that says to find a goal, to find a purpose. And as corroboration for this theory, just observe how many people are looking for their quote unquote purpose in life. And this meta goal makes it impossible to actually lose all of your intrinsic values because you can never actually lose this meta goal. If you do lose all but the meta goal becomes active at that point, and so your current intrinsic goal becomes finding some purpose that is different from that meta goal. And in the case of ninjas committing suicide, maybe they do it because they believe for one reason or another that this meta goal is unachievable, that no matter what they do, they will never find a new purpose. And that can be pretty depressing. So I'm actually pretty sure that my theory about why ninjas commit suicide is wrong. I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to ninja values, but I just wanted to bring up this idea of meta goals because I just think it's interesting. And by the way, Jornet also has meta goals. Recall that his goal is doing what he believes to be unachievable. And phrased it differently, I can say that his goal is finding a goal which he believes to be unachievable. So this goal of finding a goal is just an example of a meta goal. And actually, meta goals are everywhere if you look. For example, some people want to be successful, period. They don't care that much what they're going to be successful in. And as an illustration for this, there is this surfer called Lane Beachley, who said in an interview for the, by the way, awesome YouTube channel called Road Trip Nation, she said, quote, "When I was 8 years old, I decided that I was going to become the best in the world at something. It didn't matter what," unquote. And in a way, becoming successful is a generalized meta goal. It is generalized in the sense that the precise activity in which they want to become successful at is abstracted away, and it is a meta goal because it involves actually finding a concrete activity, a concrete goal in which to become successful in. Alright, so in the interest of time, I'm going to cut my reply here and pass the torch to you again.
Incredible greetings. It's been slightly longer than 3 weeks since your reply. I take my time. I have meditated, give it a thought a couple of times, but I only have bullet points. I want to be as genuine as possible on my response. So I want to cover a couple of things, a couple of points, but I will start for something you said that sometimes the goals cannot be achieved. So the goal is impossible and achievable. So the question is that a good thing, a right thing? Should you do it? Should you not? I have one example that actually is what I reminded when I was listening to you, and it's Bruce Lee. If you don't know who that is, in the 70s he was a martial artist and also a movie star. But he was also a philosopher. That fact may be not that well known, but I think he had a college degree on philosophy, which you may think that's so random, but it's not. It's not, oh, be what my friend, it's more deep than that. So long story short is that he said, one quote, a goal is not always meant to be reached. it's often served simply as something to aim at, close quote. And I think that is really relevant. It's like a paraphrasing what you said, that he reached a point that he was number one on the world. Not only that, is that he could not compare to anybody. So how can you set the goal when it is unknown? You don't know what is impossible or impossible because you are making history now. You are defining what's the new possibilities of humankind. So what goal do you set? So that will be a meta goal, and that meta goal will be impossible. You could say, oh, I want to achieve 200 pounds of deadlift or whatever, to say something easy to understand and compare and measure. It's okay, or maybe 3,000 or whatever. The point is that you could phrase it as the goal of, I want to be the strongest man on earth, being for mass or for acceleration. In Bruce Lee was about acceleration. So in one hand you have to be as much as possible, and the other is one quantity that will be impossible to achieve at, and you will do your maximum effort. So even if the goals are phrased differently, for me in the practical sense it's the same goal. Then going back to kill internet, as in Bruce Lee, he made history. He cannot be compared to anybody. He's defining the new limits of human physiology. So take for instance, I think some years ago he climbed at the Everest, right? You may know that the Everest is the highest mountain on the entire world, by far, the most famous. And usually the climbers take, I don't know, couple of weeks or even months, and sometimes they even die in the process. They have Sherpas, they have usually artificial oxygen and so on, because of the heights. Very high is very hard to breathe with the low pressure of oxygen and so on, right? Yeah, you know that at some time on the history some people climb it alone. Yes, that has been accomplished. Or they climb it without artificial oxygen. Okay, that's already done in history. But what he did, what Kill Internet did, is he did it not by walking, but almost how it's called, racing. And that was his goal. Is okay, he went without oxygen and almost without gear and without Sherpas. It's more or less how you will do your jogging on the neighborhood or in the gym. He went to the Everest to do that, and he climbed at the peak and go back in record time, in I don't know, 20 something hours. That is already crazy because it's more than one entire day exercising. Sorry. And people do not believe that. And he has proof with the GPS and so on. But people thought that goal is impossible. That is humanly impossible. And he didn't care about it. It's because his goal was not to prove to society or to the niche of climbers and alpinists to show that this is possible to do in hours, not in several weeks, right? Without almost resting. Because that was not his goal. And now is the other thing you said, that for other people that goal is unachievable, it's impossible, but for Kill Internet it's actually possible, with lots of pain and risks because he may have died and so on, but he made it, right? Now is the question relies on, okay, but this has been possible in 2017. But he has accumulated lots of experience, and also on the body physiology. He's very optimized now of how efficient is consuming the oxygen and so on, without going to details. So perhaps if he would try to climb the Everest at a younger age, he may have failed. That goal was impossible, right? So I think that this is dynamic, not static. I can set a goal today that it's impossible, but sometime in the future that will become possible without changing any of my capabilities, just the knowledge of it. I'm lacking so much knowledge that I cannot assess the viability, and later on I can assess it and become aware. Oh, you know what? That was possible to begin with, even if I don't increase or decrease any capability. Then moving on. You said about intrinsic meta goal or purpose, and I will use the same examples. Bruce Lee had one goal, one meta goal, and that didn't care. That shaped his lifestyle. His lifestyle was what you don't see on behind the screen on movies. Is training, training, and training, and training every day. I know he trained constantly with all the effects that it had. The same for Kill Internet. I mean, if you do competitions or races yourself that are longer than a day, who has to be your training, right? So he went to Norway to live in Norway so he could climb on that mountains. So he had a very cold weather and so on. So he would mimic the conditions of the Everest, right? But this is restricting your lifestyle. You live almost alone, very isolated of society, only with his girlfriend, but without that, before that, he was alone, almost alone. And yeah, so his lifestyle was based on his goals. And I think that is a definition of an intrinsic meta goal. So now I have one meta goal myself about getting rid of the Prussian school model, right? Of making the learning experience something free. That is very broad, right? But okay, I can have one small goals that will serve to that meta goal. That is doing this episode or this podcast or writings or a YouTube channel or and so on or events on social media, talking to influential people and so on. So even though you could say, oh, you're failed because I can see the stats of my episodes and I can tell you that some episodes no one in the world have watched them. That means that I have recorded and edited that video and nobody watched the entire thing. You could say, oh, that goal is a failure and so on. But for me that's not the case. Because yes, you could say that I failed if the goal was reaching people. Yeah, I haven't reached much people. But for me it's not a failure because that's an intrinsic meta goal. And intrinsic, it's not about extrinsic measurement, views, watch time, or fame, and so on. It's only about me, because that's the definition of being intrinsic. And since it comes from me, I will never understand it as a failure, because how I measure it is okay. I haven't reached many people, but now I'm more aware of how the schooling works on other countries, and I met people who at some degree shared my problems when I was a student myself, and I can become more aware and so on. So I wouldn't phrase it as waste of time or as a failure. And even if I will fail and again and again and again and I die without succeeding any goal, that doesn't mean I failed at the intrinsic meta goal, because one key point for intrinsic meta goal is that it's based on you, your criteria, your thoughts, your ideology, and so on. not about any outcome. Or to phrase it differently, the one intrinsic meta goal is regardless of the outcome. It's never based on the outcome. It's, oh, I want to get a Nobel Prize, or I want to get as rich as possible, or I want to get whatever. You can measure more easily. It's no. I want to make the biggest impact as possible that it's on my hands, on my reach. So how can I measure the intrinsic meta goal? It's for my own commitment. If I put on all the time, all the efforts, all my knowledge, all my skills, and everything is in my hand, that will be a complete success. Regardless of the outcome, even if the outcome is an utter failure, that I reach to nobody, I make no change, and compulsory schooling is keeping perpetuating when I die. Let's take one other example. Is based on what you said, that surfer is okay. Let's say I want to make a record, a world record, a Guinness World Record, but I don't care which one. The goal is to have a world record for vanity, right? So I could look at the web page and see what would be within reach, and it could be some pointless thing like how many steps you can do with holding an egg with a spoon, or a banana on your head. Some very point, because there are so many pointless records out there. That will be the opposite of what I was saying. Is, yeah, you could define that as a success if I do more time or more repetitions of that record and I become the record holder. Then I could define that at some point in my life I was top number one on the world on one very specific thing. It's okay, I achieved that goal, but do I have one intrinsic meta goal? That was being what? Being a record holder, a purpose. But does this change my lifestyle once I achieve it? This will change it meanwhile, in the process. Once I achieve that record, that's it. I can move on. What do I do now? Achieving more records, but that was not my goal, right? So I think that there are some intrinsic meta goals that has a defined, there are different kinds. That will be the equivalent of the ninjas, right? Once you do it, it's done. It's something that's a finish. There are some other goals that, if you phrase it as to have the maximum impact on society, or to do as much as possible, that as much as possible it's relative, and the limitation would be your life span. So the limiting factor will be death, and the other, you could achieve the goal and that's it, right? Oh, I want to be the wealthiest man on earth. Okay, now let's see that you are surpassed Elon Musk. Now what you do? Now you are the richest person on earth. That's it. And how you keep living? What's your intrinsic meta goal then? If you are already I think I made my point came across, and yeah, and that's, for me, that's a very big difference. Even though it's just a nuisance, is that the intrinsic meta goal should be based on you, not on the process, not on the outcome. And it's indefinite in time. That's what makes it meta for me, and the former makes it intrinsic. And that could be even the opposite, that you can fail all your life and succeed on no goal at all, but the intrinsic meta goal will still be considered as a success. Nothing more to add. I have been more verbose than I wanted to, but I want to be as genuine as possible. I think I covered more or less what I could say about this topic, so feel free to add whatever you want that we haven't talked about, or something related. And I think we can start to wrap up the episode. And yeah, see you next time.
Alright, hello again from me. And unlike you, William, I am not going to be genuine and I will just stick to reading off my notes. That Bruce Lee quote is very interesting, that a goal is not always meant to be reached, it often simply serves as something to aim at. But often, if you don't mean to reach it, you kind of lose the drive to keep going in that direction. I think that to maintain the motivation to move towards it, you have to mean to reach it and you have to believe that you can do it, or at least hope that you can. And like every day, I have a set of choices I can make about which goal I should move towards. And why would I choose the goal which I don't even believe that I can achieve, when I can just choose a goal which I do believe is achievable? You also made a very good point about how goals Jornet is achieving at the later stages of his career, like trying to climb Everest in record time, may have seemed unachievable when he was younger, but now don't seem as impossible. So by setting smaller goals and achieving them, you are improving in a way in which carries over to goals that now may seem impossible. And you are also gaining a better appreciation of what is possible. So to rephrase this, when you take a step in some direction while having in mind a particular destination, you are also making progress towards other destinations, which now may seem impossible to reach. But that doesn't matter as much, because you know that between your current position and that impossible destination, or at least the one that seems impossible, there are many other desirable destinations. So that even if you fail to reach that destination that seems impossible, you will have at least gone through many desirable ones. And I think that knowing that there are many desirable ones in the middle of the road is very important to keep your motivation up. And we should separate movement from the things that are motivating and driving us to move. When it comes to meta goals, I think that there is a bit of a mismatch between the way me and you understand this concept. For me, it just means a goal which, in its definition, has the concept of a goal. Like, for example, I may have the goal of finding a goal. And I brought it up because I thought it was interesting how we can be searching for goals in an analogous way, like we are searching for our keys, for example. I also disagree that getting a lot of views on YouTube cannot be an intrinsic goal. That intrinsic goals involve only ourselves and no other people. I think it's little bit more subtle than that. An intrinsic goal, I understand it to be those goals which are not pushed on by other people. They come from within us. But because we are highly social animals, many, if not most, of the goals that come from within do actually involve other people. And those goals, even though they involve other people, they are still intrinsic, at least the way I understand the concept. You also said that an intrinsic goal, because it comes from within you and not from someone else, you can never consider it a failure. And for me personally, the way that I understand things, this is not true. In fact, I wonder if something which cannot fail can even be considered a goal. Like, yes, sometimes we fail to achieve a goal, but nonetheless get something out of the process. And maybe if we are lucky, we may fail but get something even better than the goal. However, getting something valuable out of the process doesn't mean that we didn't fail to achieve the goal. We still failed. Finally, you mentioned that intrinsic goals should be focused on the process and not the outcomes. And while I do agree that enjoying the process is absolutely paramount, I wonder if it is possible to enjoy it without having in mind the outcome that we want to arrive at through the process, and also believing that the process can actually get us to that outcome. For example, very often a set of actions feels dull for me, but when I set a particular goal which those actions can serve, the exact same set instantly loses its dullness. So I think that we should have both: aim for an achievable outcome and also enjoy the process of getting there, not only getting there. Often you can't have one without the other. Alright, I think this has been my final recording. It's it's maybe time to start wrapping this up. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast again. Doing it incrementally was a very interesting and enjoyable experience, definitely.